32 degrees north. That's the coordinate. At that latitude, the Atlantic Ocean is supposed to be cold, dark, and empty of coral. No reef should survive this far north. Bermuda does. It sits alone, a barrier reef system 1,000 kilometers from the nearest continent, kept alive by a warm current that has no business reaching this far. There is no river here, no lake, no natural spring. Not one drop of fresh water occurs naturally anywhere on this island. Every hurricane season, storms strong enough to erase smaller islands pass directly overhead. And yet 64,000 people live here, richer, on average, than almost anyone else on Earth. A place with nothing should not be this wealthy. So how did a rock with no water become one of the most valuable pieces of land on the planet? This isn't a story about a pretty island. It's a story about risk, physical risk, and financial risk, and the strange point where the two collide. Bermuda's fresh water depends entirely on rainwater capture and desalination. Its coastline absorbs Category 3 and 4 hurricanes almost every year, and yet its economy runs almost the entire global catastrophe insurance industry. If Bermuda's model fails, it isn't just 64,000 people who feel it. Insurance companies covering hurricanes in Florida, earthquakes in Japan, and floods in Europe all route their worst-case risk through this island. The stability of one small landmass underwrites the financial safety net of the rest of the world. Before we go further, if you had to guess what share of the world's catastrophe bonds the instruments insurers use to survive their worst payouts run through this 121 square mile island, drop your number in the comments. We'll come back to it. Start with the ground itself. In 2019, a study published in the journal Nature confirmed something unprecedented. The volcanic foundation beneath Bermuda didn't form the way any other volcano on Earth forms. It wasn't created at a tectonic boundary. It wasn't created by a conventional mantle plume. Its magma originated in the mantle transition zone, 400 to 660 kilometers down, in a layer unusually rich in water and carbon. Bermuda, in other words, sits on geology science hadn't previously documented. That volcanic rock later eroded into limestone dunes, and those dunes are why the island has no rivers at all. Porous limestone lets rainwater vanish straight through the surface. Every household compensates the same way. A sloped, stepped limestone roof, engineered by law, channels rain into an underground tank. For every square foot of roof, the law requires at least 8 gallons of storage below it. This isn't a quirk of architecture. It's survival, encoded into the building code. Water scarcity forced discipline into the built environment. Space scarcity did the same to everything else. The island covers just over 50 square kilometers, and to keep it from choking on its own traffic, the government caps ownership at 1 private car per household by law. Visitors can't rent standard vehicles at all. Tourists are restricted to public buses, scooters, or small electric microcars built for 2. The speed limit across the entire territory tops out at 35 kilometers an hour, one of the lowest national limits anywhere in the world. And the building code goes further still. Exterior walls must be built from thick limestone block or concrete, anchored directly into bedrock, engineered to withstand sustained winds above 250 kilometers per hour. This is not caution. This is an entire society structured around the assumption that catastrophe is not a possibility. It's a certainty on a schedule. That instinct for resilience wasn't chosen. It was inherited from the way the island was settled in the first place. Bermuda had no indigenous population and stayed uninhabited for over a century after its discovery in 1505. Sailors called it the Isle of Devils and avoided it. Permanent settlement only began in 1609 by accident, when the English ship Sea Venture wrecked on the reef during a hurricane. The survivors built new vessels from local cedar and claimed the island for England anyway. Their account of survival became famous enough to directly inspire Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. There's one detail about Bermuda that has nothing to do with any of this, but it's too strange not to mention. A seabird called the cahao was declared extinct in the 1620s. In 1951, 300 years later, 18 breeding pairs were found alive on a remote islet, one of the most dramatic species resurrections ever documented. Locals, meanwhile, still carry the nickname onions, a leftover from when Bermuda's biggest export wasn't finance. It was onions. Now, back to the pattern underneath all of it. An island built to resist disaster is still, by every physical measure, running out of room to resist it. Sea levels around Bermuda are projected to rise as much as 0.33 meters by 2040. Saltwater intrusion into the island's underground freshwater lens, the thin layer that supplements rain catchment, is projected to increase roughly 11-fold by 2050. 96% of Bermuda's coastal reserves now require direct intervention just to slow erosion. Even the island's famous pink sand is under threat. The color comes from the crushed shells of a microorganism, Homotrema rubrum, and rising ocean acidity is putting that organism's survival at risk. For 300 years, Bermuda engineered its way around every hazard nature produced. Climate change is now producing hazards faster than limestone walls and cisterns can absorb them. So the question becomes unavoidable. How does a place this exposed also become the wealthiest place on Earth? The answer is that Bermuda didn't just adapt to catastrophe, it industrialized it. In the 1930s, facing a fragile tourism-only economy, Bermuda passed exempt company legislation that let foreign corporations incorporate on the island largely free of local corporate income tax. For decades, this stayed a modest offshore banking niche. Then, in the 1970s and 80s, a string of enormous U.S. liability and disaster claims made mainland insurers desperate for reinsurance, insurance for insurance companies, covering the payouts too large for any single insurer to absorb alone. Bermuda's regulators built a fast, flexible licensing system specifically to capture that demand, and global insurers began forming subsidiaries there by the hundreds. Today, that pivot has compounded into total dominance. The Bermuda Stock Exchange lists roughly 95% of the world's outstanding catastrophe bonds, debt instruments that pay investors interest unless a specific disaster occurs, at which point the payout gets redirected to disaster relief instead. Bermuda now holds 30 to 40% of the entire global reinsurance market for catastrophic risk, hosting more than 1,200 registered insurers writing over $316 billion in gross premiums. Combined with zero personal income tax, zero capital gains tax, and no sales tax, the result is a GDP per capita between $110,000 and $143,000. Bermuda didn't outrun its exposure to catastrophe. It made catastrophe its core export. The island most likely to be hit by a hurricane is also the island the rest of the world pays to help survive one. That model is now under direct threat, not from a storm, but from policy. The OECD's Pillar 2 initiative imposes a 15% global minimum corporate tax, challenging jurisdictions like Bermuda, whose competitiveness has long relied on a zero corporate income tax. Compliance means restructuring a tax framework that has defined the island's economy for decades. At the same time, Bermuda's population is aging rapidly, with a fertility rate of 1.41 children per woman, a median age of 46, and population growth that has turned negative. The finance sector runs on skilled foreign labor, yet Bermuda's laws offer only limited pathways to permanent residency and tightly restrict property ownership for expatriates. The island engineered its way around hurricanes. It's now being asked to engineer its way around its own tax code and its own demographics at the same time. A place with almost nothing ended up holding almost everything, because scarcity forced it to get precise about risk before anyone else had to. Bermuda never stopped being vulnerable. It just learned to price that vulnerability better than anywhere else on Earth. Maybe the more interesting question isn't why Bermuda survives its exposure. It's what happens to the rest of the global insurance system when it eventually can't. If you want to explore more extreme geographic oddities and how humanity adapts to the edges of the map, hit subscribe. And let us know in the comments below, can a tiny rock in the middle of the Atlantic keep defying its own geography forever?